And so I want to give you one quick Old Testament story or picture of that, which is really cool. And it's a very popular passage, but it's Exodus 17, where Israel is fighting Amalek. And so Amalek actually pictures the flesh in our Bible, this fits, but it fits really with all of the stuff we're dealing with fighting and spiritual warfare and all that kind of thing. And so, just for context, Exodus 17:8 says, Then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim. All right, so there's a battle here, just like the battle that we're talking about with spiritual warfare. We're in a battle. They're in a battle, and I'll remind you that 1 Corinthians 10 says that all these things, this wilderness experience and journey to Canaan, they were written aforetime for our learning, according to 1 Corinthians 10, and that they were to be in samples for us. All right, so things that we can see before us and take to heart and personally apply so that we don't fall into the same temptations, okay? So there's this battle going on. Well, we see these two weapons of warfare take place in this battle, which ultimately brings victory for Israel. All right, well, how do you figure, Dylan? Well, verse 11 or verse 10. So Joshua did as Moses had said to him and fought with Amalek, and Moses and Aaron and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And it came to pass when Moses' hand held up his hand that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. Okay, so this is the passage where Aaron and Hur come alongside Moses, and a lot of good illustrations we can pull from that, talking about communion and fellowship with our brothers and Christ and all that. We can talk about a lot of stuff, but specifically here, what they're doing is they're holding up his hands. Okay, which that pictures prayer. Well, Dylan, that's kind of a long shot. How does that picture prayer? Well, 1 Timothy 2:8 says, I will therefore that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. And so it's connected with that. And so here we have, the passage says that when his hands weren't down, they weren't prevailing. But when they were, which pictures prayer, Israel was winning. All right, and then it goes on to say that in Exodus 17:13, and Joshua discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. And so here what we have is obviously the edge of a sword. We know what that pictures. That's the word of God. That literally is the sword of the Spirit, is the word of God. And there in Ephesians 6, like we read. But specifically, it's Joshua who pictures Jesus taking the sword and actually putting it into the enemy and ultimately bringing Israel victory. Well, how does Joshua picture Jesus? Well, there's a lot we can say about that, but specifically, Jesus is the New Testament name for Joshua. So Joshua was the Old Testament name because Old Testament is Hebrew. Jesus is that same name, Greek substitute there, obviously, which gives us our New Testament. And so again, it says, in Joshua discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of a sword. And so that's just a cool Old Testament illustration that shows us kind of what can happen in our life with 2 Corinthians chapter 10. Again,